Good evening. Welcome to Economics 330, Global Trade and Political Economy, City University of New York, MEC. Today, of course, is Tuesday, December 2nd, 2025. And this is the lecture portion of our office hour and lecture. The formal lecture portion of our office hour and lecture, that is. Um, And I hope you now know from this week's assessment that today's lecture will be on international debt crisis. Of course, as I'm sure you also remember, last week last week's lecture was on international political economy. As we learned earlier in international monetary relations lecture, when a country is unable to pay for its imports from its exports, it has to borrow money to make up the difference. This, of course, as I hope you know, it's called a balance of trade deterioration, a balance of payment deterioration. These borrowings may accumulate, thereby making it difficult for a country to participate in international trade, which in turn creates social, economic, and political problems within the debtor country. As an example, consider countries that have to import energy, gasoline, electricity, or what have you. If they're unable to finance the import of these products, these essential goods and these essential inputs to being a productive economy, you can quickly see how this will truly quickly deteriorate into economic and social challenges for the debtor country. Accordingly, these are the four learning objectives for today's class and, of course, for your week's assessment. The first is to explain the cause of international debt crisis, to which I would say that the textbook cause of international debt crisis include first, irresponsible lending on the part of creditors. Second, mismanagement on the part of debtor countries. And third, worldwide recession. Economic growth, population expansion, and increased government spending drive the need for borrowing. During economic downturns, governments intensify borrowing. They may do that and often do to stimulate economic activity and provide financial support, which can, at least in the short term, exacerbate debt crisis. But because of the 2008 financial crisis, we now also know that a laissez-faire attitude or an economic doctrine that opposes government interference in economic affairs beyond the minimum necessary for the maintenance of peace and property rights can result in weak regulation and potentially moral hazard for businesses. And the resulting interaction with especially the financial market in at least the situation of the 2008 financial crisis can become the vehicle for contagion of international debt crisis, or at least the global contagion of international debt crisis. The second learning objective for the week is to describe debt restructuring, to which I say that debt restructuring is a process that involves negotiating with creditors to reduce interest rates or extend payment terms and or cut loan balance. Restructuring can help make debt situation more manageable through smaller payments, lower interest rates, or reducing overall debt burden, which of course is debt forgiveness, partial debt forgiveness in this case. There are three ways to restructure debt. The first is that bondholder or holders can take a haircut. The second is negotiating terms, which of course is to extend the repayment period, which in turn will reduce the payment amount. And the third is a debt for equity swap, where creditors receive ownership stake in local assets. But this mode is increasingly out of fashion. In the latter place, which is debt for equity swap, is a new wave of transactions known as debt for nature or debt for development swaps. This emerging sovereign debt swap is best illustrated in 2023 when Ecuador executed the world's largest debt for nature swap by buying back approximately 1.6 billion of its international bonds at a significant discount. This transaction was in part facilitated by a $656 million Galapagos bond, which was insured by the International Development Finance Corporation, or DFC, a constituent institution of the World Bank Group. In return, Ecuador committed to spending more than 450 million of the savings on marine conservation for the Galapagos Islands. The third learning objective for the week is to describe the role of the World Bank and IMF in attempting to resolve various debt crises. According to the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, it works to achieve sustainable growth and prosperity for all of its member countries. It does so by supporting economic policies that promote financial stability and monetary cooperation, which are essential to increase productivity, job growth, and economic well-being. The IMF is governed by and accountable to its member countries. The IMF has three critical missions. First, furthering international monetary cooperation. Second, encouraging the expansion of trade and economic growth. And third, discouraging policies that would harm prosperity. To fulfill this mission, IMF member countries work collaboratively with each other and with other international bodies. Specifically, the IMF fosters international financial stability by offering 1. Policy advice. A core responsibility of the IMF is monitoring the economic and financial policies of member countries and providing them with policy advice, an activity known as surveillance. As part of this process, which also takes place at the global and regional levels, the IMF identifies potential risks and recommends appropriate policy adjustments to sustain economic growth and promote financial stability. The second role that the IMF plays is to provide financial assistance. Unlike development banks, i.e. the World Bank Group, the IMF does not lend for specific projects. Instead, the IMF provides financial support to countries hit by crisis to create breathing room as they implement policies that restore economic stability and growth. It also provides, it being, of course, the IMF, it also provides precautionary financing to help prevent crisis. IMF's lending is continuously refined to meet countries' changing needs. The second role that the IMF plays is capacity development. The IMF works to strengthen the capacity of national institutions, including central banks, which we call the Federal Reserve System here in the United States, finance ministries, which we call the Treasury Department here in the United States, revenue administration, statistical agencies, and financial sector supervisory agencies, resulting in more effective policies and greater economic stability. The IMF works with member countries to modernize their economic policies and make institutions more effective by providing demand-driven, tailored technical assistance and training focused on issues that are critical to economic stability and growth. Of note, capacity development can help countries improve tax collection, modernize monetary and exchange rate policies, develop legal systems, strengthen governance, and collect and disseminate data, and much more. Conversely, the World Bank Group focuses on, or the institutions, the constituent institutions of the World Bank Group focuses on providing financial and technical assistance to developing countries to reduce poverty, promote sustainable development, and oversee the implementation of free market reforms on behalf of international creditors. Additionally, the World Bank, as appropriate, will finance government programs to support achievement of country development objectives and support policy and institutional reforms of national and subnational governments by providing budget financing and global expertise. The World Bank also finances public projects to build physical and social infrastructure and develop institutional capacity. The types of financing by the World Bank include investment project financing, which provides financing to governments for activities that create physical, social infrastructure necessary to reduce poverty and create sustainable development. Development policy financing, that's another role that the World Bank plays, development policy financing, which provides budget support to governments for a political subdivision for a program of policy and institutional actions to help achieve sustainable shared growth and poverty reduction. The next line of responsibility for the World Bank Group is programs for results, which links disbursement of World Bank funds directly to the delivery of defined results, helping countries improve the design and implementation of their own development programs and achieve lasting results by strengthening institutions and enhancing systems and building capacity. The Galapagos bond that I have just discussed and which was insured by the International Development Finance Corporation, DFC, is a classic and innovative example of a World Bank group, a World Bank project. In combination, both the IMF and the World Bank Group, promote cooperation among nations to address economic challenges and foster global prosperity. Accordingly, both institutions contribute to poverty reduction efforts through their financial and technical assistance programs. 4. Describe different international political economy perspectives on debt crisis. International political economy, or the relationship between politics, economics, and between states and markets, offer 3 distinct theories on debt crisis. In liberal theory, international institutions will intervene when there is a debt crisis. That's what the liberal theory would suggest. 2, for economic nationalists or mercantilists, states will leverage economic advantages, including debt, to advance national interest, i.e. the debt for equity swap that I mentioned that is increasingly going out of fashion. The third is the Marxist perspectives, which will highlight North-South, client-patron, unequal relationship. Of course, I hope you remember that North-South is a shorthand for industrialized, mostly northern countries, and South is a shorthand for underdeveloped and or developing um, southern countries. Again, mostly southern countries. So this concludes our Module 13 lecture. For next week's Module 14, the last lecture for the semester, our focus will be on current trends in IPE, or International Political Economy. I wish everyone good luck with this week's assessment, and I will now turn off the camera as we transition, or the recording, sorry, as we transition to questions and answers and office hour. Thank you so very much.